The folder landed on the conference table between us with a soft thud. I stared at it, then at my father-in-law Frank Weston, who sat across from me with his arms crossed. His expression was calm, almost pleasant, like he was doing me a favor. "Open it," he said simply. My hands shook as I pulled the folder closer and flipped it open. Inside were new ownership documents for Weston Manufacturing, the family business I'd poured 2 years of my life into. I scanned the pages quickly, my eyes catching on the signature lines, the percentage allocations, the legal language that meant everything. My name was gone, completely erased. "What is this?" I whispered, looking up at him. Frank leaned back in his leather chair, adjusting his tie. "It's a restructuring, Tessa. The company needs to move in a different direction, and frankly, you were never really part of this." The words hit me like a physical blow. My husband, Mark, sat beside his father, silent as a stone. I looked at him desperately, waiting for him to speak up to defend me. He wouldn't meet my eyes. Frank smirked, sliding a pen across the table. "You'll thank me when this all blows over." I stood in the parking lot outside the office building, my whole body shaking with rage and humiliation. The folder was still clutched in my hands, the papers inside feeling heavier than they should. Cars passed by on the street, people going about their normal days while mine fell apart. "My name is Tessa Lawson Weston," I said out loud to no one, my voice cracking. "And today I learned what family loyalty really means." The words felt hollow in my mouth. I remembered my first day joining Weston Manufacturing 2 years earlier, fresh with excitement and ideas. Frank had greeted me with a firm handshake and a smile that seemed genuine then. "Welcome to the family business," he'd said, his arm around Mark's shoulders. "We're glad to have you." I'd believed him. Believed that marrying Mark meant becoming part of something bigger, something lasting. I'd given up my own career opportunities to help build this company, working nights and weekends without complaint. And now, standing in this parking lot with legal documents that erased me completely, I realized how naive I'd been. Frank had never seen me as family. I was just free labor with a smile. 2 years ago, I'd walked into Weston Manufacturing with a business degree and fresh ideas about digital transformation. The company made industrial parts for construction projects, but their sales model was stuck in 1995. Everything was done through phone calls and paper catalogs. I'd spent 6 months building an online sales platform from scratch, teaching the older employees how to use it, personally calling clients to walk them through the new ordering system. Sales had jumped 30% in the first quarter. Frank had called me into his office then, actually looking impressed. "You've got a good head on your shoulders," he'd admitted grudgingly. "Keep this up and you'll have a real future here." But when a major deal fell through 6 months later, a deal Frank had personally negotiated poorly, he made sure everyone knew it was somehow my fault. "The client said our online system confused them," he'd announced at a staff meeting, looking directly at me. "Maybe we moved too fast with modernization." Mark had found me crying in my car that afternoon. "Dad just has high standards," he'd said, rubbing my back. "Don't take it personally, he's like that with everyone." But he wasn't. He was like that with me. The undermining started slowly, so gradually I almost didn't notice at first. Frank began excluding me from important client meetings, claiming I was too busy with the digital side of things. My accounts started getting reassigned to other employees without explanation. I'd arrive at work to find someone else handling my biggest clients. When I finally confronted Frank about it, he'd looked at me with cold eyes. "You're being too emotional about this, Tessa." Leadership requires a level head. Maybe you're just not cut out for that kind of responsibility. The words stung because they were designed to. Emotional. The word men always used to dismiss women when they stood up for themselves. I went back to my desk, my face burning with shame and anger. 2 days later, I discovered my name had been removed from the corporate email signature list. Every employee had their name, title, and contact information automatically attached to company emails. Except me. When I asked the IT department about it, they looked uncomfortable. "Mr. Weston requested the change," they said quietly. "Said you were transitioning to a more behind-the-scenes role." Behind the scenes meant invisible. It meant erasable, and Frank knew exactly what he was doing. The real blow came at a family dinner 3 weeks later. Frank's house was full of relatives, Mark's aunts and uncles and cousins, all gathered around the long dining table. I'd made my special lasagna, hoping to score some points with the family. Frank stood up halfway through the meal, tapping his wine glass for attention. "I have an announcement," he said, smiling warmly at everyone. "Weston Manufacturing is undergoing some exciting restructuring." Everyone leaned in, interested. I felt a knot form in my stomach. "Tessa has decided she wants less responsibility at the company," Frank continued smoothly, gesturing toward me. "She wants to focus more on home life, maybe start a family soon." My mouth fell open. I'd never said anything like that. "We're so supportive of her decision," Frank added, and everyone started clapping. Mark's aunt reached over and squeezed my hand. "Good for you, honey. Career isn't everything." I sat frozen, unable to speak, unable to breathe. Under the table, Mark squeezed my other hand and leaned close. "Just go along with it tonight," he whispered urgently. "We'll talk about it later. Don't make a scene." So I sat there, smiling through tears, while my father-in-law publicly erased my career and everyone congratulated me for it. After the dinner, after all the relatives left and Mark drove us home in silence, I finally exploded. "You knew," I said, my voice shaking with rage. "You knew he was going to do that and you didn't warn me." Mark sighed, pulling into our driveway. "It's complicated, Tessa. Dad needs to make some financial changes. The company's been struggling." "So he's cutting me out completely." Mark wouldn't look at me. "It's temporary. You'll get your shares back later, once things stabilize. He just needs to consolidate ownership for now to make the books look better for potential investors." The words felt like lies even as he said them. I knew Frank well enough by now to recognize a permanent move when I saw one. "And you're just going along with this?" I asked quietly. "He's your father, but I'm your wife." Mark finally met my eyes, and what I saw there broke something inside me. Guilt, yes. But also resignation. He'd already chosen his side. "Please just trust me," he said weakly. That night I lay awake while Mark slept peacefully beside me. At 2 a.m., my phone lit up with an email. It was from Frank, sent to me and copied to Mark. "Thank you for your graceful exit from Weston Manufacturing. Your contributions will be remembered." The papers arrived by courier 3 days later. Legal documents officially transferring my shares to Frank and removing me from all company records. I sat at the kitchen table, reading through page after page of legal language that basically said I was giving up everything I'd built. Mark hovered nearby, looking uncomfortable. "You should really have a lawyer look at those," he said half-heartedly. "Your father's lawyer wrote them," I replied flatly. "Seems a bit late for my own representation." But I signed them anyway. Every page, every line, my signature getting messier as tears blurred my vision. I was done begging, done fighting against people who would never see my value. When I finished, I stacked the papers neatly and slid them back into the envelope. "I'm walking away from years of work," I said quietly, more to myself than to Mark. "I know," he said. "I'm sorry." But sorry didn't change anything. I drove to the office one last time to drop off the signed documents. As I walked through the parking lot, a woman I vaguely recognized stopped me. Riley Kane from Kane Investments. We'd met briefly at a business conference months ago. "Leaving Weston?" she asked, nodding the box of personal items I carried. I nodded, not trusting my voice. Riley handed me her card. "If you ever start something new, call me." The first month after leaving Weston Manufacturing was the hardest. I'd wake up each morning feeling purposeless, my routine completely disrupted. Mark went to work at his father's company while I sat at home, scrolling through job listings and feeling my confidence drain away. But slowly, I started rebuilding. I began taking on freelance consulting work, helping small businesses with their digital marketing and sales platforms. At first, it was lonely, working from my kitchen table in pajamas, taking video calls with clients I'd never meet in person. But my ideas worked. The small companies I consulted for saw immediate improvements in their online presence and sales. Word spread. One client led to another, then another. Within 3 months, I had more work than I could handle alone. I started turning down projects, being selective about who I worked with. My kitchen table transformed into a proper home office. I bought a second monitor, a professional camera for client calls, a whiteboard for planning. Mark noticed the change but didn't comment much. The distance between us had grown into a canyon neither of us knew how to cross. Then one of my clients, a small manufacturing startup, mentioned they were working with a private investment group. "You should pitch them your consulting model," she suggested. "They're always looking for startups with real potential." The pitch meeting happened on a Tuesday morning in a sleek downtown office. I'd prepared a presentation about my consulting business, my success rates, my vision for growth. The investment group listened politely, asked sharp questions, and seemed genuinely interested. Then, during the Q&A portion, one of the investors mentioned a company they were currently evaluating. Weston Manufacturing, he said casually, flipping through his notes. Mid-sized industrial parts manufacturer. Seeking significant funding to avoid bankruptcy. My heart stopped. I tried to keep my face neutral, but my hands gripped the edge of the table. They've been declining for about 6 months, the investor continued. Bad management decisions, outdated systems, clients jumping ship. It's a mess, honestly. Another investor chimed in. We're trying to decide if they're worth saving or if we should let them fold. The lead investor, who I now recognized, looked up at me with knowing eyes. Riley Kane. The woman who'd given me her card in that parking lot, she smiled slightly. Tessa, you used to work there, didn't you? The room went quiet, everyone looking at me. Yes, I said carefully. For about 2 years. Riley leaned forward. Would you like to sit in on our evaluation meeting with them? Purely professional, of course. Your insight could be valuable. I should have said no. Should have walked away from anything connected to Frank Weston and his failing company. But something in Riley's eyes told me this was an opportunity I couldn't pass up. Yes, I heard myself say. I'd be interested in that. Riley smiled wider. Excellent. The meeting is scheduled for next Thursday at 10 a.m. I drove home in a daze, my mind racing. Frank was desperate enough to seek outside investors. The company I'd helped build was apparently falling apart without my systems and client relationships. Part of me felt vindicated. Another part felt sad for the employees who'd lose their jobs if Weston Manufacturing went under. That evening, I opened my laptop and searched for recent news about the company. What I found shocked me. Sales had dropped 40% since I left. 3 major clients had switched to competitors. The online platform I'd built was apparently broken, with no one knowing how to maintain it properly. Frank had destroyed in 6 months what had taken me 2 years to create. I looked at the calendar on my phone. Next Thursday. 1 week to prepare. Then I saw Frank's name on the meeting docket, listed as primary presenter for Weston Manufacturing. My pulse quickened with something that felt like anticipation. Thursday arrived cold and bright. I dressed carefully in my most professional suit, the dark blue one I'd worn to my first big client presentation years ago. Riley had sent me the meeting agenda the night before. Frank would present first, explaining Weston Manufacturing's financial situation and funding needs. Then the investment team would ask questions and deliberate. I arrived early, taking a seat in the back of the conference room while Riley and her team set up. Frank walked in exactly on time, carrying a leather briefcase and wearing his most expensive suit. He didn't notice me sitting in the shadows. His presentation was a disaster from the start. He fumbled through financial projections, couldn't explain the sudden sales drop, and made excuses for every failure. We've had some staffing changes, he said vaguely. Temporary setbacks, nothing we can't recover from. Riley's team asked pointed questions. Why had their top 3 clients left? Why was the online sales platform no longer functioning? What was the plan for recovery? Frank's answers grew more defensive with each question. Our digital operations were managed by someone who left the company, he finally admitted. My daughter-in-law, she was. He paused, searching for words. Unreliable, emotional. We're better off without her, honestly. Riley glanced at me. I kept my face perfectly neutral. After Frank's presentation ended, Riley stood up. Thank you, Mr. Weston. We'll need some time to discuss internally and get back to you. Frank nodded, gathering his papers with shaking hands. He looked older than I remembered, tired and stressed. As he turned to leave, Riley spoke again. Actually, before you go, I'd like to introduce someone. Frank paused, looking confused. Riley gestured to where I sat in the back. This is Tessa Lawson, the founder of Lawson Consulting. She's been advising us on manufacturing sector investments. I stood up slowly, walking into the light. Frank's face went white when he recognized me. His mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Tessa, he managed. What are you doing here? Consulting, I said calmly, taking a seat at the main table. Ms. Kane asked for my professional opinion on various manufacturing companies seeking investment. Riley leaned forward, her voice sharp. You mentioned someone managed your digital operations before the recent decline. Would that be Ms. Lawson? Frank's jaw tightened. Yes, and those operations were successful during her tenure, Riley pressed. The 30% sales increase you mentioned earlier, that was under her management. Frank couldn't answer. After the meeting officially ended and Frank left, Riley turned to me with a knowing smile. You were the brains behind that whole operation, weren't you? Riley and I went to a coffee shop across the street after the meeting. She ordered us both espressos and got straight to business. Weston Manufacturing is going under, she said bluntly. Frank Weston has no idea how to run a modern business. He's bleeding money and clients. I know, I replied, sipping the bitter coffee. So here's what I'm thinking, Riley continued, leaning forward intently. We don't invest in his company. Instead, we invest in you. You start a competing firm focused on modern manufacturing solutions with actual digital infrastructure. We provide the capital, you provide the expertise. My heart raced. A competitor to Weston Manufacturing. Not just a competitor, Riley said, grinning. A replacement. You take his clients, his market share, everything. You already know the industry inside and out. I thought about Frank's smug face across that conference table, telling me I'd thank him someday. Thought about Mark staying silent while his father destroyed my career. But if we do this, I said slowly, we do it right. I don't want to just hurt Frank. I want to build something better, something that lasts. Riley raised her espresso cup. Even better, because if we do it right, they'll come to us. They'll have no choice. We spent 3 hours in that coffee shop, sketching out plans on napkins and discussing logistics. Lawson Solutions launched 6 weeks later. Small but focused, with Riley's investment group providing initial capital and me providing industry expertise. We targeted companies that needed exactly what Weston Manufacturing used to provide, but with modern efficiency and customer service. Our first big client was a construction company called Apex Builders. They'd recently cut ties with Weston Manufacturing over quality issues and poor communication. I scheduled a meeting with their purchasing manager, presented our capabilities and pricing, and had a signed contract within 2 days. The morning after we landed Apex, my phone rang. Mark, Tessa, what's going on? He said, his voice stressed. Dad just lost a major contract, Apex Builders. They signed with some new company called Lawson Solutions. I kept my voice neutral. That's unfortunate. Wait, Mark said slowly. Lawson Solutions, that's your maiden name. Tessa, is that you? I didn't answer directly. I started a consulting firm, yes, I told you about it months ago. You're stealing Dad's clients, Mark's voice rose. I'm offering better service, I corrected. There's a difference. He hung up on me. 10 minutes later, Frank called. I didn't answer. He left a voicemail, his voice tight with barely controlled rage. I don't know what you think you're doing, but this is war. You hear me? War. Over the next 3 months, Lawson Solutions grew faster than I'd imagined possible. We landed 5 more clients, all of them former Weston Manufacturing customers who'd grown frustrated with poor service and outdated systems. Frank started sending employees to investigate us. One of them, a woman named Angela who used to work in accounting, actually approached me at a networking event. Mr. Weston sent me to find out who's running Lawson Solutions, she admitted quietly. I recognized you immediately. I waited, unsure if this was a trap. Angela smiled sadly. I just want you to know everyone at the old company knows what really happened, how Frank pushed you out. We're all watching you succeed now, and honestly, most of us are rooting for you. She paused. Also, the company's falling apart. Frank can't make payroll some weeks. The banks are circling. A week later, Riley called me with news. Kane Investments received a formal request from Weston Manufacturing. They're seeking emergency funding. Without it, they'll be bankrupt within 2 months. What did you tell them? I asked. Riley laughed. I told them we'd schedule a meeting to discuss terms, but here's the interesting part. They have no idea Kane Investments is the majority funder behind Lawson Solutions. We kept that quiet on purpose. Conflict of interest, I suggested. Strategic positioning, Riley corrected. Your move, Tessa. I watched from a distance as Weston Manufacturing collapsed. News filtered through industry contacts, through former employees who reached out to congratulate me on Lawson Solutions' success, through Mark's increasingly desperate phone calls that I mostly ignored. Frank had missed payroll twice now. His best employees were jumping ship, sending resumes to competitors and finding new jobs before the company officially folded. The building that housed Weston Manufacturing was apparently falling into disrepair, with broken equipment going unfixed because there was no money for maintenance. Then came the final blow. Frank's primary bank froze his business credit line, citing too much risk and too many missed payments. Without access to credit, he couldn't buy raw materials, couldn't fill existing orders, couldn't function at all. According to Angela, who'd since quit and found work elsewhere, Frank spent entire days locked in his office, refusing to admit defeat. His assistant finally convinced him to reach out to one last potential investor group, Kane Investments. Riley received the formal request on a Friday afternoon. She forwarded the email to me with a single line, "Your move." I stared at that email for hours, thinking about everything that had led to this moment. Finally, I replied, "I'll attend as a silent partner. Let's see what he's willing to offer." The meeting was scheduled for Monday morning, 9 a.m. sharp. Riley's team prepared thoroughly, reviewing Weston Manufacturing's financials and creating various bailout scenarios. None of them were particularly favorable to Frank. Sunday night, I barely slept. I kept imagining Frank's face when he saw me, kept rehearsing what I'd say, how I'd act, professional, calm, completely in control. Mark called twice that weekend. I finally answered the second time. "Tessa, please," he said, his voice breaking. "Dad needs help. The company's going under. If you know anyone, any investors." "I might know someone," I said carefully. "Really?" Hope flooded his voice. "Would you make an introduction, please? I know things ended badly between you and Dad, but he's desperate. He'll work with anyone at this point." I let the silence stretch. "I'll see what I can do," I finally said. Mark thanked me profusely, clearly not understanding what was about to happen. Monday morning arrived gray and cold. I dressed in my most powerful suit, black with sharp lines. Riley met me outside the conference building. "Ready?" she asked. I took a deep breath, adjusting my portfolio folder. "Ready." We walked in together, two women who'd built something from nothing, about to face the man who'd tried to destroy one of us. Frank arrived exactly on time, strutting into the conference room with forced confidence. He looked terrible up close, his face gaunt and eyes bloodshot from stress. But he still carried himself like he was doing us a favor by being there. "Thank you for meeting with me on such short notice," he began, setting his briefcase on the table. "Weston Manufacturing is looking for strategic partners who understand the manufacturing sector." Riley stood to greet him, shaking his hand firmly. "We appreciate you coming in, Mr. Weston. Please have a seat. Let me introduce our investment team." She went around the table, nomming each person and their role. Frank nodded at each one, trying to look confident. "And finally," Riley said, gesturing to the seat beside her, "our majority partner and chief strategic advisor." I stood up from where I'd been sitting slightly behind the others, stepping into Frank's line of sight. His jaw literally dropped. What are you doing here?" He stammered, looking between Riley and me with growing panic. I sat down calmly, folding my hands on the table. "I'm with Kane Investments, Mr. Weston. Specifically, I'm with Lawson Capital, the primary funding arm. This is the firm you requested a meeting with." Frank's face went from pale to red. "This is a joke. You can't possibly," Riley interrupted smoothly. "Ms. Lawson is our majority partner, yes. She holds controlling interest in all our manufacturing sector investments." Frank tried to recover, but his composure was shattered. He fumbled through his prepared presentation, his hands shaking as he held up financial projections that everyone in the room already knew were unrealistic. "As you can see," he said, his voice lacking conviction, "with the right capital infusion, Weston Manufacturing can return to profitability within 18 months. Riley asked the first question. "Your projections show significant recovery, but they don't address the core issue. You've lost your entire digital infrastructure and your top client relationships. How do you plan to rebuild those?" Frank's eyes darted to me, then away. We're developing new systems, training staff. It's just a matter of time." "Time you don't have," I said quietly. It was my first time speaking directly to him. "Your former clients have already moved on. They're working with competitors who offer better service and modern platforms." "Competitors you probably recommended them to," Frank shot back bitterly. I smiled slightly. "I didn't have to recommend anything. They found better options on their own. That's how business works." The negotiation continued for another hour. Riley presented various bailout scenarios, each one carefully designed to benefit Kane Investments while leaving Frank with very little control. "Essentially," Riley explained, "we'd be acquiring Weston Manufacturing as a subsidiary. You'd remain as a consultant, but all major decisions would go through our management team." Frank's hands gripped the edge of the conference table so hard his knuckles turned white. "You're talking about taking over my company completely," he said, his voice strained. Not taking over, Riley corrected. Acquiring, there's a difference. We'd be saving your company from bankruptcy while restructuring it for actual success. Under her leadership, Frank said, pointing at me with barely contained rage. Under competent leadership, I replied calmly. Which, as we've established over the past 6 months, you're not providing. Frank stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. This is insane. You're punishing me for making a business decision months ago. I'm making a business decision now, I countered. The same way you did when you cut me out. You told me I'd thank you someday, remember? His face twisted with anger and something that looked like fear. You're taking everything I built. I stood too, meeting his eyes directly. No, Frank, you handed it to me when you underestimated me, when you thought being a woman made me weak, when you erased my name and expected me to disappear quietly. The room was silent, everyone watching this confrontation. Frank's voice cracked. Mark will never forgive you for this. As if summoned, the conference room door opened. Mark stood there, having apparently followed his father. He looked between us, understanding dawning on his face. Tessa, he said weakly, you're really doing this. I gathered my papers, preparing to leave. Your father did this, Mark. He just didn't expect consequences. Mark turned and walked out without another word. The news spread through the industry within days. Weston Manufacturing was being acquired by Kane Investments and merged into their portfolio under Lawson Capital Management. The press release was professional and brief, but everyone in the sector understood what had really happened. I visited the Weston Manufacturing facility for the first time since I'd been forced out. The employees gathered nervously in the main production area, waiting to hear about their futures. I stood in front of them, remembering how I used to walk these same floors, talking to these same people about digital systems and efficiency improvements. I know you're all worried, I began, but I'm not here to destroy this company. I'm here to save it and save your jobs. Angela, the former accountant, started clapping. Others joined in slowly. We'll be implementing changes, I continued. Modern systems, better client communication, fair wages, and profit sharing. Anyone who wants to stay and be part of that is welcome. After the meeting, I walked through Frank's old office. He'd already cleaned it out, leaving behind only a dusty desk and empty shelves. The nameplate that had read Frank Weston, President, was gone. I sat in his chair for a moment, looking at the view he'd had for 30 years. Then I stood up and walked out. There was too much work to do to waste time on symbolism. Frank retreated from public view completely. According to Mark, he'd moved to his vacation house in Florida, refusing to talk about the company or what had happened. Hardest part wasn't the business transition. It was the family fallout. Mark and I tried to maintain our marriage for a few months after everything exploded, but the foundation was too broken. We sat across from each other at our kitchen table one evening, the same table where I'd signed away my shares what felt like a lifetime ago. I never thought you'd actually win, Mark said quietly. Win, I repeated. This wasn't a game, Mark. This was my career, my dignity, everything I worked for. But you destroyed him, Mark insisted. My father built that company from nothing and you took it away from him. I stood up, tired of this same argument. Your father destroyed himself the moment he decided I was disposable. I just refused to disappear the way he expected me to. Mark looked at me with something like sadness. I don't know who you are anymore. I'm the person I always was, I replied. You just never noticed because it was convenient not to. We divorced 6 months later. It was quiet and amicable, at least on paper. Mark got the house. I got my freedom and my company. Frank sent me one message through his lawyer, a request for a private meeting. I almost said no, but curiosity won out. We met at a neutral coffee shop downtown. He looked older, smaller somehow, without his office and title to hide behind. I wanted to apologize, he started, but I could hear the resentment underneath the words. Do you? I asked. Or do you just want to try to manipulate me one more time? He had the decency to look ashamed. You taught me exactly how not to lead. Frank tried to maintain some dignity during our meeting, but his bitterness kept breaking through. I built that company from nothing, he said, stirring his coffee mechanically. 30 years of my life. And you destroyed it in 6 months, I replied. That's not my fault. He flinched. I underestimated you, I'll admit that, but you didn't have to be so ruthless. I leaned forward, keeping my voice low but firm. You called me emotional, unreliable, unfit for leadership. You publicly humiliated me, stole my work, and tried to erase me from a company I helped save. And when I survived that, when I built something better, you call me ruthless. Frank had no answer. We sat in silence for a long moment. I'm sorry, he finally said, and this time it sounded more genuine. For what it's worth, you proved me wrong about everything. I stood up, leaving money for my coffee on the table. It's worth something, I admitted, but it doesn't change anything. You made your choices and I made mine. As I walked toward the door, I heard him call after me. You'll regret crossing me, Tessa. People like me don't forget. I turned back, smiled slightly, and said, People like you already lost, Frank. There's nothing left to fear. I never saw him again after that meeting. Months passed, then a full year. Lawson Solutions grew beyond anything I'd imagined during those dark days in my kitchen. We expanded into 3 new markets, hired 50 employees, and became known for fair practices and innovation. Riley and I became genuine friends, not just business partners. She'd seen potential in me when I couldn't see it in myself, and I never forgot that. One afternoon, she came into my office carrying a wrapped package. This just came, she said, grinning. I opened it carefully. Inside was a custom plaque, beautifully engraved. It read, Never underestimate quiet ambition. Below that, in smaller text, presented to Tessa Lawson, who proved that the best revenge is building something they can't buy back. I hung it on the wall behind my desk, where I could see it every day. The industry took notice. Trade publications wrote articles about the Weston manufacturing turnaround and how new leadership had saved a dying company. None of them mentioned Frank by name anymore. I implemented profit-sharing programs, giving employees direct stakes in the company's success. I started a mentorship program specifically for women in business, remembering how alone I'd felt. Angela, my former ally from Weston, became my head of finance. You gave me a second chance, she said when I offered her the position. I'm giving all of us a second chance, I replied. 2 years after everything fell apart and rebuilt itself, I stood on a stage at the National Business Conference. The auditorium was packed with entrepreneurs, executives, and students hopping to learn something about resilience and success. The spotlight was bright, but I'd grown comfortable with visibility. I'd earned it. My father-in-law cut me out of the family business, I began, watching faces in the crowd lean forward attentively. He told me I wasn't really part of it, that I'd thank him someday for making me leave. I paused, letting that sink in. He was wrong about a lot of things, but he was right about one. I do thank him, because losing everything forced me to build something better. I talked about failure, about humiliation, about the temptation to give up. I talked about the women who supported me, like Riley, who saw potential when everyone else saw a liability. Sometimes, I said, approaching my closing, the best revenge isn't destroying those who hurt you. It's building something they can't buy back, can't diminish, can't erase. The audience erupted in applause. People stood, clapping and cheering. In the front row, Riley stood with tears in her eyes, grinning proudly. After the speech, young women lined up to talk to me, to share their own stories of being underestimated and overlooked. I listened to each one, gave advice where I could, and made sure they knew they weren't alone. Later, driving home, I thought about Frank and his crumbling empire, about Mark and the marriage I'd lost, about the person I'd been 2 years ago, signing away her dignity in a kitchen. That woman was gone. In her place was someone stronger, someone who'd learned that true power comes not from taking, but from building, someone who'd turned devastation into legacy. Frank's empire had crumbled from pride and arrogance. Mine had risen from purpose and determination, and that, I realized, was the difference between us. He'd built on fear. I'd built on hope. Justice, I'd learned, doesn't always come with thunder and lightning. Sometimes it comes quietly, steadily, one decision at a time. And sometimes, the best victory is simply becoming someone your enemies never imagined you could be.